The TT has a horrendous misfire, which means one of these 4 cylinders isn't firing as it should be. And because of that, it's causing the car to run like this. So for the petrol engine to work, it runs on something called the Otto cycle, or better known as suck, squeeze, bang, blow.
So suck, that is the first stroke, or stroke 1. That's when the engine sucks in the air-fuel mixture ready for stroke 2. Compression, or squeeze. That is when the engine then squeezes and compresses the air-fuel mixture to make it more volatile for stroke 3, which is bang, or better known as your power stroke. This is when the engine ignites the air-fuel mixture to give you that explosion, which then pushes the piston and the rod down, creating the power stroke, which then moves on to stroke 4, blow. That's when the engine then pushes the exhaust gases out of the cylinder, ready for the cycle to start all over again. That's also why these engines are referred to as 4-stroke engines. And for a 4-stroke engine to run properly, you need all of those elements to work as they should.
And something tells me on the TT, one of those 4 elements isn't quite working properly. Now, if you saw last week's video, you'll see that I've eliminated one of them, which is the spark, because I serviced the car last week, changed the spark plugs, and it made no difference. But if you haven't seen that video, go click in the top right hand corner now. But because I've eliminated the spark and I know the coil packs are okay, the next thing I will move on to really is compression, and there's one way you can test that. And the reason I'm going straight to compression is because I know the air intake is okay, because that filter definitely isn't given any restriction from there to the turbo, and from there, if I take this bung off, a lot of the air is coming out, so we know it's getting air. But anyway, this fancy little piece of kit is called a compression tester, and as you can see on the top, it's got a pressure gauge on it. So what you do is you thread that into the cylinder in place of your spark plug. So you take all your coils off, take all your spark plugs out, thread that in, connect the gauge to that, and when you turn the engine over, that gauge will go up and it'll tell you how much compression you've got, because it'll retain the value due to the check valve on this. So let's pull the coils, pull the spark plugs, and check the compression.
If you're not already subscribed to the channel, I want you to jump down below and smash that subscribe button, because it's free and it really helps me out. And not only that, but I do really appreciate it.
So as you can see, I've now took all the spark plugs and all the coil packs out. And now that I've took them out, I've actually noticed something, because these go from cylinder 1, 2, 3 and 4. One spark plug, as you can see, has actually been doing something. 2 spark plugs definitely been doing something, but it also tells me it's been running rich because of how much soot is on the plug. 3 spark plug, again, defo been running, but then you get to 4. 4 spark plug looks very clean for a plug that's just come out of what was a running engine, which leads me to believe whatever issue I've got lies within cylinder 4. And again, I know that plug and coil pack work, not only because they're new, but because the other day I swapped 4 and 3 over to see if it was the coil pack or the plug, because I used the plug and the coil pack, moved them around, and as you can see, that plug is quite clearly being firing. When it was in 4, it looked like that. Now it's in 3, it looks like that. Same with the coil packs. So I think the coil and the plug are okay, but cylinder 4 has an issue. And I hope to God it's not compression, but we'll find out in 2 seconds. But like I said, you thread this bit into the engine where the spark plug would have been. You just need to get a good enough seal on the O-rings on the pipe. Now that's in tight. You use the quick release push fitting on the top. Push it in, now that's in tight, and there you can see the pressure gauge. Because the spark plugs are out of the car will turn over a lot easier, which will then allow it to actually build pressure quicker. And after doing that, you can see that cylinder has just under 150 psi of pressure. The pressure's dropping down now because the valves are open. So I'll do the same process on the other 3, and I'll come back to you. So I've now done a compression test on the engine, and I can confirm that there is good compression on every cylinder, 150 psi, which is actually quite surprising considering this engine is on 141,000 miles. But now I know I've got good coil packs, good spark plugs, good compression. The next thing really, because I know I've got good airflow, is fuel. Now some of you eagle-eyed viewers will have also probably noticed something else to do with the PCV, but that's all down to vacuum. Because these modern engines rely on vacuum to set the air-fuel mixture for them to run properly. And this PCV valve is known to be an absolute pain on these TFSI engines. But I've got a solution for that, and that'll have to be in next week's video. So if you want to see that, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and keep an eye out, because it'll be going up and it will fix any problems you've had with any vacuum issues to do with that stupid PCV valve. But for the time being, I've kind of made my own PCV delete, and that's with a rubber bung and some Jubilee clips, and then I've kind of just bunged and taped this pipe just to eliminate that as well. But I'd highly recommend against doing that at home, because you could probably cause more damage doing so. Desperate times call for desperate measures. But like I said, now I know I've got spark, I've got compression, I've got air, the next thing is fuel, and I've got a funny feeling the injector on this engine is probably toast. Based on the condition of the spark plugs, something tells me it's in cylinder 4. So unfortunately for me, but luckily for you, I'm now going to have to figure out how to pull this intake manifold off to possibly either clean or replace those fuel injectors. And there's a lot going on, so we might as well get straight into it.
As you can see, the intake manifold is actually quite a busy part of the engine because it's the front 50%. But the first thing I need to do is take off any of the electrical connectors I think will get in my way, along with any of the vacuum lines that could possibly stop me from removing this intake manifold. Because the fuel rail is mounted to the intake manifold, I know I'm going to be taking that off, and as part of taking the fuel rail off, I need to, one, depressurize it because there's a lot of high pressure fuel still in it, and two, I need to take off the high pressure fuel pump just to give me a bit more access and disconnect the hard line underneath, otherwise this manifold's not going anywhere. Now I've got to remove the evap line, the fuel return line, the crankcase vacuum hose, the PCV hose, the metal coolant pipe bolts, the oil dipstick nuts, the oil dipstick stud to get it off the actual intake itself, the crankcase breather hose, and now more electrical connectors. Anyone who's ever worked on any cars to do with the Volkswagen Audi group will know that these electrical connectors are an absolute pain to get off without snapping them, and because of the age of the engine and the fact that it's on 140,000 miles, it's had a fair few heat cycles, meaning all the plastic in the engine bay has gone so brittle it's so hard not to snap anything. But as I'm doing this, I need to make sure I don't break anything, because the only spare parts I have is a set of fuel injectors, so if I snap any of these connectors or any of these pipes, I'm done for.
So that's most of what I need to take off, but there's still a fair bit left to take off to get this intake manifold off with the fuel rail and the injectors, because they all come out at once. But in terms of getting this off, like you can see, there's a few Torx bolts on the back. You'll see what ones I need to take off in a minute, but they tend to be highlighted with the little grooves within the intake, so they're the ones I need to take off. Down the bottom you can see, just in the back down there, there's a nut, then there's a bolt, then there's another bolt, then there's another nut just in that gap over there. And on the intake, it's actually quite sneaky, because underneath there's a nut, and if you don't see that nut and you start pulling on it, chances are you're going to snap the manifold, and if you snap the manifold, you're toast. And this nut that I need to get off is right behind the throttle body, and I think it's a 13mm. So I'll get all that off now. You'll see it on a time lapse, and then I'll show you that nut.
So now I'm loosening off all the long Torx bolts that hold the intake manifold to the head of the engine. When I've got them loose, I'm going to use my magnet on a stick to pull the bolts out. That way I won't lose them in the engine bay, because if I drop them, I think they'll be gone forever. Now that those bolts are out, I can loosen the bolts off on the throttle body to remove the throttle body to get to that hidden nut behind it.
So now I've took the throttle body off, I can show you that hidden nut I was on about, and it's that one right there, and then down the back is a spline bolt. So I need to get that nut off, and I need to get that spline bolt out, but I can't do that without getting the dipstick out the way. That's why I took that stud off there, so I need to get the dipstick up, get that out, put it somewhere clean. And now the dipstick's out the way, I can get that nut off with a 13mm, and I can get that spline bolt out with what I think is an M10 spline bit. And then after that, the manifold can come off. These fuel injectors better work after all this. So now that that's everything, I think, off, I'm going to try and pull the manifold forward, and hopefully if I've done it right, it should come off. So this is it, the moment of truth, and if I've missed anything, I'm sure I'll find out right now. Let's give it. I'm going to be forceful but not too rough. And it's coming. Did I forget anything? Just got to pull the wiring loom off the brackets underneath the crank breather hose. set that back through. And that's the intake manifold with all 4 fuel injectors off. There it is. That's the back of the TT engine without the intake on. There's the intake manifold and there are the fuel injectors. And looking at the injectors, you can see cylinders 1, 2 and 3 have all been firing because they're covered in black. Cylinder 4 is actually quite clean, meaning cylinder 4 hasn't been doing anything. And while I'm in here, I had a little look at the backs of the valves, because typically on a direct injection engine, the back of your intake valves end up looking a bit like exhaust valves, and these aren't great, but they're not the worst I've ever seen. So I think for now I'll try and give them a bit of a brush, but that'll have to do. But if you want to see me try and do a DIY walnut blast in the future, let me know down in the comment section below, and if that many people actually want me to, I'll give it a go and see how far I get. But right now I need to change these fuel injectors, so let's get the old ones off and get the new ones in.
So to remove the fuel injectors from the fuel rail, the first thing I need to do is to take off the electrical connectors gently, because I need to reuse them.
There's one. There's 2. There's 3. And there's 4. So that's all 4 plugs pulled off. Now, looking at the tops of the injectors, like I said, 1, 2, 3 and 4. 4 is clean, the other 3 aren't, so I think 4 hasn't been working or it's been stuck closed. So what we need to do now is with these injectors, you just pop out the rail, because they're only held in by little O-rings. Takes a bit of persuasion. There it is. That is a fuel injector. One that doesn't work. Marvellous. So now I've pulled the injectors out, I also need to make sure that I take these little blue O-rings out, because the new ones come with new ones without scratching them. And there they are, they just come out nice and easy. And now I can just stick new injectors in. Before I do put them in, I need to make sure I lubricate the O-ring, because if you stick it in as it is, it'll probably rip. So get a bit of fuel on it. Get the injector in. It's seated. That's it seated. And do the same on the others. There they are. That's 4 brand new injectors in on the fuel rail. So now the new injectors are fitted into the intake, it's just a case of putting everything back together in reverse of how we took it apart. So you can't see me do it, so I'm just going to do that backwards, and I'll come back to you when it's all back together. We'll try and start the car and we'll see if I've either fixed it or made it worse. So see you in a bit. Well, it's now a couple hours later and everything's back together, so it's only really time to start it. But we've got to wipe the codes off the engine first. You get rid of all the fault codes on the ECU, get rid of the engine light. Crank it over a few times to prime the high pressure fuel pump, and then see if it starts.
So here it is, the moment of truth, and I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't nervous. This is the point where we find out, has the hours I've spent replacing those fuel injectors actually made a difference? Will the engine start? Of course it will, and it's running perfectly.
I'm so glad the hours I've spent changing that fuel injector has actually made a difference, and it's fixed the problem that I was having. And the engine is ticking over nicely and it sounds fantastic, as does the exhaust note, because as you can see there's no splutters, no pops, no bangs, no nothing. It's ticking over nice and smooth. And the funny thing is, if those of you who watched last week's video, top right hand corner now, you'll see I've actually already changed that exhaust, but real time for me now, I haven't done it yet because it didn't make sense to change the exhaust until I know the car actually runs properly. But now I know the car runs properly, I can finally fit that exhaust, which is technically already fitted. Well, to you. But now that it's running nice and smooth, that exhaust will sound fantastic when I finally get it on. Don't you just love it when things go your way? Eventually. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. Now you kind of know how to change a fuel injector on an Audi TT, even though this isn't a how-to, it's just how I did it, and you can use it as a guide. But once again, thank you very much for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you get an update every time I post a video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Lie awake at night? Are you afraid to turn out the lights? Is there